One summer, 5 farewells, and a silence that feels almost orchestral. Sly Stone, the shapeshifter who braided funk and soul into a new American pulse. Brian Wilson, the studio visionary who taught the ocean to sing. Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness, whose roar turned heavy metal into a household word. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, the steady heart of a family sitcom, grown into an artist of quiet purpose. And Hulk Hogan, larger than life, a cartoon come true who made arenas believe in miracles. Separate myths, one chorus of goodbyes. What do these departures tell us about the cost and the gift of living under the brightest lights? Tonight we trace the last chapters, the final minutes, and the echoes they leave behind in our playlists, in our living rooms, and in the stories we tell. Sly Stone was not just a band leader. He was an architect of a new American groove. As the visionary behind Sly and the Family Stone, the rare era-defining ensemble that was multiracial and mixed gender, he fused gospel fervor, soul, melodicism, psychedelic rock, and the propulsive syncopation that would crystallize as funk. The band's anthems danced to the music. Everyday People, I Want to Take You, Higher and Family Affair didn't merely climb charts. They redrew the boundaries of pop, wedding deep social messages to ecstatic dance floor immediacy. On the Woodstock stage in 1969, Stone's call and response became a midnight revival, igniting a generation and signaling that his vision of inclusion could move both hearts and bodies. Born Sylvester Stewart, he came of age as a Bay Area DJ producer and studio tinkerer before stepping to the front of a band that treated diversity as a sound, not a slogan. Across the late 60s and early 70s, he delivered records that still feel airborne, bright with brass, rubbery bass lines and harmonies that seem to smile while speaking hard truths. Even as the music turned darker in the new decade, the template he drafted remained foundational for artists from Prince to hip-hop samplers. This is where our story begins with a restless innovator who taught America to hear itself in a different rhythm. In his later years, Sly Stone became almost mythic, rarely seen, fiercely private, and reluctant to explain the long silence that followed his revolution. There were brief flashes of daylight, the cryptic 2006 Grammys walk-on, a reminder that even in seconds he could bend a room's gravity. And much later, a memoir that finally let him set the record in his own voice with a foreword by Questlove. In a rare 2023 interview, Stone spoke with measured clarity about memory, making peace with damage and the stubborn power of rhythm. The book was less a victory lap than a reconciliation with the band that changed America's pulse with the decades he lost, and with the audiences that never stopped sampling his sound. Behind the privacy was a body giving out. According to his family and representatives, Stone had battled chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and other complications for years, living quietly in the Los Angeles area and surrounding himself with a small circle. When the end approached in June 2025, the family said he passed peacefully encircled by his children and loved ones, a closing image that fits the man who once turned crowds into a single choir. What remains largely unshared are the granular details of those final days, how long the last hospitalization lasted, which songs he asked to hear, what he said when the room fell still. Those omissions are not a mystery to solve so much as a boundary to respect, but they leave one human question tugging at the next chapter of our story, beyond the statement and cause. How did those final hours truly unfold? On June 9th, 2025, Sly Stone died in Los Angeles at the age of 82 after a prolonged struggle with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and other complications. His publicist and family described a peaceful passing with loved ones at his side, an intimate scene that stands in tender contrast to the stadium-sized choirs he once led. In a statement released the same day, his family said he was surrounded by his children and closest friend, underscoring how closely guarded his final years had been, and how deliberately those closest to him drew a circle of care as his health declined. The wording left little doubt about the immediate cause, yet left room for privacy about the precise cadence of those last hours. What music was playing, who spoke first, which memories surfaced when the room finally fell quiet. What the record does show is clarity. The place, the date, the cause, and a family intent on framing his goodbye with dignity rather than spectacle. But was that the whole truth? What Sly Stone leaves behind is a blueprint for American pop that fused joy with protest, and a band whose mixed-race, mixed-gender lineup reimagined who could stand on the same stage together. His Hall of Fame credentials were never in doubt. Sly and the Family Stone were inducted in 1993, their catalog becoming bedrock for funk, pop R&B, and later hip-hop. From the unifying charge of everyday people to the midnight revival of Woodstock, his songs taught crowds to move and to mean it. Long after the charts, you could still hear his fingerprints in Prince's exuberant hybridity and in the sample-rich architectures of modern music. The morning arrived with testimony. Questlove, Chuck D, Bootsy Collins, and others saluted a pioneer whose grooves echo forever, a reminder that Stone's most radical idea was that rhythm could change how we live together. His family's statement framed the goodbye with dignity, peaceful, surrounded by children and loved ones, while inviting listeners to carry the spark forward. In the weeks since, appreciations have emphasized both the utopian promise of those early anthems and the hard-won truth that brilliance can outlast unraveling. For anyone who ever shouted along to "I Want to Take You," higher, his legacy is simple and enormous. The dance floor is a place where difference doesn't just coexist, it grooves. Brian Wilson was the rare figure who could turn a pop song into an ocean. As the founding composer and guiding ear of the Beach Boys, he crafted the shimmering California sound that defined an era and continues to echo far beyond it. Born in 1942 in Inglewood, California, Wilson showed an uncanny gift for harmony from childhood, hearing voices and chords as colors and landscapes. By the mid-1960s, he was not just writing hits, but orchestrating miniature symphonies for the teenage heart surfer girl in my room, California Girls. His 1966 masterpiece, Pet Sounds, reframed what an album could be, with intricate arrangements and emotional candor that floored even the Beatles, who credited it as a spark for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Wilson's genius, however, was inseparable from his fragility. Even at the height of success, he wrestled with mental health struggles and periods of retreat from the stage, making his eventual returns all the more poignant. Yet, through decades of turbulence, his voice and vision endured, painting Southern California, not just as a place, but as a dream, sunlight refracted into melody. That enduring combination of vulnerability and brilliance is what made him more than a pop star. He was a composer whose work reached into the marrow of 20th century music, leaving a signature that was unmistakably Brian's. In his later years, Brian Wilson became both a living monument and a fragile reminder of how genius exacts a toll. After decades marked by mental health struggles and physical decline, he continued to surface for carefully arranged concerts and tributes, each appearance drawing reverence from fans who understood how much effort it took simply for him to sit at a piano. His performances were often described as uneven. His voice sometimes trembled, his focus flickered, but the audience response was unwavering, treating each note as a gift. In early 2025, Wilson's health worsened. Reports noted recurring hospitalizations tied to respiratory complications, along with long-standing diagnoses that had left him frail. Family members, who had long been both caretakers and custodians of his legacy, faced the painful task of managing not just medical crises, but also conflicting narratives about how Wilson's final years were handled. The Beach Boys' extended family itself was fractured, tributes were heartfelt, but old tensions lingered, spilling even into discussions of his eventual memorial. When Mike Love delivered a controversial eulogy that some saw as self-serving, it reignited decades-old rifts within the band, drawing headlines that contrasted sharply with the serene aura Wilson's music once conjured. Perhaps the most poignant thread was Wilson's own silence. Friends described a man increasingly withdrawn, more present in memory than in conversation, his once boundless curiosity narrowed by the weight of illness. And yet, when he did engage, he carried the same childlike wonder that had fueled God only knows, a reminder that beneath the frailty the dreamer remained. This tension between the fragility of his body and the immensity of his influence set the stage for the final chapter, where questions of dignity, legacy, and truth would converge. On June 11, 2025, Brian Wilson died in Los Angeles at the age of 82. The death certificate listed respiratory arrest as the immediate cause with sepsis, and a urinary tract infection noted as underlying conditions. His family released a statement describing a peaceful passing surrounded by loved ones, and asked that fans remember him through the music rather than through the difficult medical details. It was an ending that mirrored much of Wilson's life: clinical facts on one side, transcendent melodies on the other. Almost immediately, tributes surged across social media and news outlets. Yet, even amid the grief, old tensions resurfaced. The Beach Boys' memorial service in early August was overshadowed by controversy, when Mike Love's remarks drew criticism for self-promotion, sparking debates about whether the band's internal fractures had followed Wilson into death. Fans, meanwhile, bypassed the conflict by gathering outside Wilson's former homes, holding impromptu sing-alongs of God Only Knows and Wouldn't It Be Nice. Those final hours remain described only in outline: a hospital room, a failing body, and the presence of family. Did he hear music as he slipped away? Did his mind conjure the layered harmonies he once heard in Technicolor? The public may never know. But was that the whole truth? Brian Wilson's death closed a chapter, but his music remains an unfinished sentence still echoing through popular culture. Pet Sounds is cited not just as a landmark album, but as a Rosetta Stone for modern pop. Its emotional honesty and orchestral sweep, influencing generations from the Beatles and Fleetwood Mac to Radiohead and indie visionaries like Animal Collective. His harmonies, stacked like stained glass, turned California into a mythic place, sun-soaked, wistful, eternal. Tributes poured in from across the musical spectrum. Paul McCartney called him the greatest genius of American pop, echoing a sentiment he had voiced for decades. Younger artists, from Billie Eilish to Harry Styles, acknowledged how Wilson's melodic daring shaped the very sound of the songs they now sing. Beach Boys fans worldwide gathered for communal listening sessions, treating his work less as entertainment than as a shared inheritance. Even the controversies around his memorial underscored his importance. The fact that debates still swirled about how best to honor him proved how deeply people cared. Wilson's family urged fans to remember his pure love of harmony and to carry that spirit into their own lives. In many ways, this was the most fitting tribute to let his music continue as a living language, binding strangers into a temporary family whenever God Only Knows drifts from a speaker. That is the gift he leaves us, and it is one that does not fade. Ozzy Osbourne's life reads like heavy metal scripture, loud, chaotic, and ultimately immortal. Born John Michael Osbourne in Birmingham, England in 1948, he grew up amid post-war industrial grit, a landscape that would shape the ominous riffs and haunting atmosphere of the music he helped create. As the frontman of Black Sabbath, Ozzy introduced the world to a new vocabulary of sound, doom-laden guitars, unflinching lyrics, and a voice that carried menace and melancholy in equal measure. Songs like Paranoid Iron Man and War Pigs didn't just define heavy metal, they codified it, giving the genre both a sonic and cultural identity. After his departure from Black Sabbath, Ozzy reinvented himself as a solo force. With albums such as Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman, he showcased both raw power and unexpected melodic craft, bolstered by his collaborations with guitar virtuoso Randy Rhoads. The hits Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley ensured his place as a generational icon. Yet his influence stretched beyond music through the Osbournes. One of MTV's earliest reality shows, he and his family became unlikely television stars, introducing a softer, eccentric domesticity that contrasted his demonic stage persona. By the time he reached his 70s, Ozzy was more than a singer. He was a cultural archetype, the Prince of Darkness who laughed at himself, survived countless health scares, and embodied heavy metal's defiance of both time and expectation. His story is one of reinvention and resilience, the sound of steel mills transformed into global anthems. In the twilight of his career, Ozzy Osbourne lived suspended between legend and frailty. After publicly revealing his Parkinson's diagnosis in 2020, he faced a cascade of health setbacks, spinal surgery, infections, repeated hospitalizations that forced him to cancel tours he had long promised would be his last hurrah. Each announcement carried the same mix of apology and defiance. Ozzy never wanted to quit, but his body demanded compromises he could not will away. Still, he refused to vanish. In 2022, he stunned fans by performing at the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, his hometown appearing visibly weakened yet triumphant as thousands sang Paranoid with him one more time. He released Patient Number 9, the same year earning a Grammy for Best Metal Performance in 2023, a reminder that his creative spark had not been extinguished. In interviews, Ozzy spoke with candor about his fear of fading, joking about death, while admitting his terror of silence. Sharon Osbourne, his partner through decades of chaos, became both caretaker and witness, often framing his fight as a testament to their bond. As 2025 dawned, whispers grew about just how much longer he could fight. A planned farewell appearance in London hinted at closure, but also left fans clinging to the hope that the Prince of Darkness might cheat time yet again. The tension became its own narrative. Every glimpse, every quote, carried the weight of a possible last. And hanging over it all was the question no one wanted answered. How long could a man who had survived so much truly keep singing into the void? On July 22, 2025, the news broke that Ozzy Osbourne had died in London at the age of 76. According to the official death certificate filed with local authorities, the immediate cause was a heart attack, with long-standing coronary artery disease and complications from Parkinson's listed as contributing conditions. Sharon Osbourne, his wife of more than 4 decades, confirmed the loss in a brief statement describing his passing as peaceful and surrounded by family. The announcement was stark, almost surgical, offering only the facts, yet it carried the full weight of finality for millions who had grown up with his roar in their ears. Reports suggest that in his final days, Ozzy had remained at home under constant care, rather than in a hospital ward. Friends who visited described a man physically diminished, but still sharp in humor, quick with a joke or a flash of the mischievous grin that had long disarmed his darker mythologies. Fans immediately gathered outside landmarks tied to his career. Black Sabbath's Birmingham haunts his Los Angeles home. Even Ozfest venues, leaving flowers, candles, and handwritten lyrics. But what truly transpired in those last hours? Did he ask to hear Crazy Train one final time? Did he share parting words with Sharon or his children? Before the silence descended, the record confirms only the clinical end. But was that the whole truth? Ozzy Osbourne's death was not just the end of a life, but the closing of a chapter that helped define modern music. As frontman of Black Sabbath, he gave heavy metal its apocalyptic voice. As a solo artist, he gave it global reach with songs like Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley. Generations of bands from Metallica and Slipknot to Avenged Sevenfold trace their DNA directly to the darkness and theater Ozzy pioneered. His reality show, The Osbournes, also reshaped pop culture, introducing millions to the idea that rock stars could be both terrifying and tender, chaotic and domestic. Tributes poured in across the spectrum. Tony Iommi remembered his old bandmate as a brother in riffs and in life, while Sharon Osbourne said simply, "He was my heart." Fans gathered online and in city streets, staging candlelit vigils and blasting Sabbath records into the night air. Artists younger than Ozzy's grandchildren, from Post Malone to Billie Eilish, shared messages of gratitude, proof that his influence crossed generational and genre lines. What resonates most is resilience, a man who staggered, fell, and got back up more times than anyone could count, only to roar again. For decades, Ozzy embodied the paradox of metal, terrifying, yet tender, destructive, yet deeply human. His legacy now lives wherever a guitar growls low, a crowd screams higher, and someone dares to call the darkness home. Malcolm-Jamal Warner grew up on American television screens, and for many viewers, he never left. Born in Jersey City in 1970, he was just a teenager when he became a household name as Theo Huxtable, the good-hearted, often bemused son on The Cosby Show. Week after week through the 1980s, Warner embodied the archetypal American teenager, relatable, imperfect, yet deeply lovable, making him one of the most recognizable young actors of his generation. His role earned him Emmy and Image Award nominations, but more than trophies, it earned him a place in the cultural memory of an era. As he matured, Warner refused to be frozen in that role. He became a director guiding episodes of Malcolm and Eddie and other shows, and he turned to music, forming his own band that blended spoken word, jazz, and soul. His career choices reflected both an artistic restlessness and a deliberate effort to escape the shadow of his sitcom youth. Colleagues described him as thoughtful and quietly ambitious, an actor, musician, director who valued craft over celebrity. By the 2000s and 2010s, Warner re-emerged in high-profile dramas like Sons of Anarchy and The People versus O.J. Simpson, American Crime Story, where his gravitas as a performer surprised those who had never looked beyond the boyish grin of Theo. To a generation that had grown up with him, Warner was proof that child stars could not only survive, but evolve. He was, in many ways, the steady heartbeat of a television legacy, one that spoke to both the promise and the pressure of growing up in the spotlight. As Malcolm-Jamal Warner entered his 50s, he carried the unusual weight of being both a former child star and a working artist, who had managed to avoid the pitfalls that consume many of his peers. By the early 2020s, he had carved out a respected niche in television dramas, guest appearances, and music projects that showcased his versatility. Off-screen, Warner was known for his privacy, rarely courting tabloids, choosing instead to cultivate a steady family life and a creative circle that valued authenticity. Yet beneath the stability, there were signs of strain. Friends described him as reflective sometimes, burdened by the contradictions of his public image, forever remembered as the son in The Cosby Show, yet determined to prove himself beyond it. In interviews, he spoke openly about typecasting and the struggle to be seen as a mature actor. He admitted that while he cherished the opportunities the show gave him, he sometimes felt trapped in its shadow, a ghost he could never quite shake. In the final year of his life, Warner had been traveling frequently between the US and Central America, working on a film project, and also seeking respite in Costa Rica's quiet beaches. Those who saw him in early 2025 noted that he seemed contemplative, more withdrawn than usual, though still committed to his work. What made those final months haunting was a detail only revealed afterward. Warner had confided to a friend that water gave him both comfort and unease, a duality that in hindsight feels tragically prescient. It was the kind of remark one brushes off in conversation, but revisits with a shiver when the headlines arrive. On July 20th, 2025, Malcolm-Jamal Warner drowned while swimming off the coast of Costa Rica. He was 54 years old. Local authorities confirmed that he died by accidental drowning, with the official autopsy citing asphyxia by submersion. The announcement stunned fans who had grown up watching him as Theo Huxtable, many of whom initially refused to believe that the man who had seemed such a steady presence on screen could vanish so suddenly and in such a solitary way. According to the Judicial Investigation Agency of Costa Rica, Warner had been swimming alone in an area where currents are notoriously strong. Efforts to revive him were unsuccessful, and he was pronounced dead at a nearby clinic. No evidence of foul play was found. His family released a brief statement asking for privacy, describing him as a beloved father, husband, and friend. Colleagues in Hollywood expressed shock at the suddenness of the news, emphasizing that Warner had shown no signs of serious health problems. What lingers is the silence around those final minutes. Did he wade into the water seeking peace, or was it simply a miscalculation on a summer day? Was there a last thought, a last flash of memory of the sound stages that once defined his youth? The record offers only the barest outline. But was that the whole truth? Malcolm-Jamal Warner's passing left a void that stretched far beyond the sitcom sets where he first became a familiar face. To millions, he was forever Theo Huxtable, the embodiment of an ordinary teenager navigating life's lessons with warmth and humor. But to peers in the industry, he was something rarer, a child actor who not only survived the glare of early fame, but transformed it into a lifelong career of craft and dignity. His directing credits, his spoken word and jazz performances, and his later dramatic roles proved that he was an artist of breadth unwilling to let one character define him. Tributes poured in from across Hollywood. Former castmates remembered him as the steady soul of The Cosby Show, while younger actors pointed to his career as proof that longevity was possible in an industry quick to discard. Social media lit up with fans sharing favorite Theo moments, but also highlighting Warner's quiet activism, his support for arts education, and his mentorship of young performers who, like him, were trying to find their way in the limelight. His death, sudden and unceremonious, forced many to reflect on how deeply embedded he was in American cultural memory. Malcolm-Jamal Warner will be remembered not only for the laughter he inspired, but for the example he set that fame could be navigated with integrity, and that a career begun in youth could blossom, mature, and endure. In the words of one longtime friend, he grew up with us, and we grew up with him. Few entertainers embodied American spectacle quite like Hulk Hogan. Born Terry Gene Bollea in Augusta, Georgia in 1953, he rose from regional wrestling circuits to become the face of World Wrestling Federation, now WWE, in the 1980s, ushering in the golden age of professional wrestling. With his blonde handlebar mustache bandana and 24-inch pythons, Hogan was larger than life, delivering catchphrases, "What you gonna do when Hulkamania runs wild on you?" that turned televised matches into cultural rituals. His bouts against Andre the Giant, Randy Macho Man, Savage, and the Ultimate Warrior were more than athletic contests. They were morality plays watched by millions. By the early 1990s, Hulkamania had become a mainstream phenomenon, with Hogan starring in films like Suburban Commando and endorsing everything from vitamins to fast food. He crossed over into cartoons, talk shows, and even rock music, transforming from wrestler to household brand. His influence was so pervasive that children in small towns and big cities alike wore his yellow and red gear, mimicking his flexes and promises of strength and virtue. Yet, Hogan was more than marketing. He was a showman who helped legitimize wrestling as entertainment, drawing stadium-sized crowds and pay-per-view records that shaped the business model of modern sports entertainment. By the time he left WWE for WCW in the mid-1990s and reinvented himself as Hollywood Hogan, he proved he could adapt, turning heel in the legendary New World Order storyline. For fans across generations, Hogan symbolized both the innocence of childhood spectacle and the theatrical drama of an evolving industry. His name, for better or worse, became shorthand for professional wrestling itself. In his later years, Hulk Hogan lived in the uneasy space between enduring icon and fragile man. Behind the broad grin and ever-present bandana was a body that had endured decades of punishing matches. By the 2010s and 2020s, Hogan had undergone more than a dozen surgeries, including repeated back operations that left him walking with difficulty. He admitted in interviews that he sometimes felt like a car with 1,000,000 miles on it, patched together, but still running on pure showmanship. Yet he remained a fixture in wrestling culture. WWE regularly brought him back for cameo appearances at WrestleMania, his voice gravelly but unmistakable, his aura still commanding. Outside the ring, he dabbled in business ventures and reality television, though not without controversy. His personal life, marked by a high-profile divorce, financial struggles, and leaked recordings that damaged his reputation, often collided with his carefully cultivated image of heroism. To some, he was a cautionary tale. To others, a survivor who embodied both the grandeur and the pitfalls of celebrity. By the early 2020s, Hogan was candid about his declining health. He spoke of chronic pain, the challenges of aging under public scrutiny, and his determination to remain visible despite it all. Fans debated whether his repeated returns to WWE were a celebration or a sad spectacle, but Hogan himself seemed to thrive on the adulation, no matter how fleeting. The Hulkamania persona never entirely left him. It was both armor and burden, keeping him larger than life, even as his physical frame withered. As 2025 approached, rumors swirled of complications from yet another surgery. Friends hinted that he was growing weaker, though still eager to be remembered, not as a broken man, but as the showman who once lifted Andre the Giant before a roaring crowd of 93,000. The tension between frailty and grandeur became the final act of Hulk Hogan's story. On July 24, 2025, Hulk Hogan died in Clearwater, Florida, at the age of 71. The official medical examiner's report listed cardiac arrest as the immediate cause of death. For a man whose image was built on superhuman strength, the clinical verdict was jarringly ordinary, a heart that finally gave out after decades of strain. According to local reports, he had been under observation in the days leading up to his death, following complications from recent surgery, though officials stressed that no direct link had been confirmed. The news broke with a statement from his family describing his passing as peaceful and surrounded by loved ones. Almost instantly, WWE and its wrestlers flooded social media with tributes posting photos of yellow and red arenas and recalling the childhood afternoons when Hogan's leg drop seemed unstoppable. Outside Hogan's Florida home, fans gathered with posters and memorabilia, some in tears, others flexing in his signature pose, shouting, "What you gonna do, brother?" as if to conjure one last encore. And yet questions remain about those final hours. Was his last conversation with family a quiet goodbye? Or did he still imagine himself in the ring, the roar of an invisible crowd in his ears? Did the Immortal One truly go gentle, or was there still a flicker of performance even as his heart failed? The record confirms the when and the how. But was that the whole truth? Hulk Hogan's death marked the end of an era when professional wrestling leapt from smoky arenas into the global spotlight. To children of the 1980s, Hogan was more than an athlete. He was a superhero, made flesh a cartoon character who could command stadiums with a flex of his arms and a booming promise of strength. Hulkamania turned wrestling into mainstream family entertainment, laying the foundation for WWE's worldwide dominance. His matches at WrestleMania III and beyond set box office records, and his heel turn in the 1990s with the New World Order proved he could reinvent himself and captivate all over again. Tributes after his death underscored that paradox. The man who was both pop icon and flawed human. WWE released a statement calling him the embodiment of an era, while Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson praised Hogan for opening doors that allowed a new generation to step onto bigger stages. Fans from around the world shared stories of childhood afternoons spent mimicking his leg drops, flexing in yellow and red shirts, and believing, if only for a moment, that good guys really could win. Yet even the controversies that shadowed his later life could not erase the scale of his cultural imprint. Hogan's legacy is one of spectacle and showmanship, of an entertainer who taught America that wrestling was not just about combat, but about theater myth and belonging. His passing leaves the ring emptier, but the echoes of Hulkamania will continue to thunder whenever a child rips open a t-shirt in imitation, grinning at the sheer joy of believing. 5 lives, 5 legacies, one extraordinary summer of farewells. From Sly Stone's joyful defiance to Brian Wilson's symphonic dreams, from Ozzy Osbourne's roar in the darkness to Malcolm-Jamal Warner's steady presence, and finally, Hulk Hogan's theatrical immortality. Their departures remind us how deeply celebrity can shape not just culture, but the rhythms of our own lives. Each of them carried contradictions, genius and fragility, triumph and scandal, spectacle and silence. Yet each left behind a soundtrack, a storyline, or a symbol that continues to reverberate long after their voices have stilled. But what about you? Which of these icons left the greatest mark on your life, and why? Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear your memories, your favorite songs, your favorite matches, your favorite moments. If this tribute moved you, please like the video. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you won't miss our next journey into the echoes of fame.